In this series, we're going to take a peek under the covers at Fotino and see how it works. And Fotino is a way of building desktop applications with web UIs. So you can use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to build your UI, and then you can have a backend of whatever you like. In this case, we're talking about .NET. In our last video, we talked about Photino Native. Native is really a series of 3 different applications written in C++, one for the Windows platform, one for the Linux platform, and one for the Mac platform. Each one is a native operating system window, like this window right here. This is a Win32 window written in C++, and the entire area of the window is taken up by a browser control. In this case, because it's Windows, we're using a WebView 2, which is basically the edge control. And you can see I can right-click on it and inspect and even pull up dev tools. So being able to build the UI for your desktop app in HTML is great. And Photino works a lot like Electron, except instead of having Node.js as the backend, we're using .NET. So we have, in this case, a .NET console window, and normally we won't show this window, but it's really nice to have in debugging. We have the full power of a .NET console app running here, so I am not running in the sandbox like most web apps. I've got access to the file system, hardware, and pretty much anything that I want. And we have a communication mechanism set up between this Win32 app and the .NET app. So I can, for example, click this button in HTML and have my JavaScript make a call that's intercepted by the .NET application and shown on screen in this case. So how does this work? Well, here's an example of that very simple application. So here's my index HTML. You can see that I've got my Photino logo. There's the button. And it makes a call into some JavaScript. When this button is clicked, send a web message into my .NET code. And then I can interpret that string however I want. On the .NET side, I'm just setting up a new Photino window. So this is me calling up that Win32 window in this case because I'm on the Windows platform. And I'm making a few calls to it to, for example, set the title. And then I'm registering a handler. So I'm saying when I get a call from JavaScript, I'm going to receive that message and do something with it. In this case, I'm just dumping it out to the console. And then finally, I tell it, this is my start page. That's where I load up my index.html. So I'm creating a new instance of this class, and then I'm firing it up and starting its event loop so that it starts running. So as a .NET developer, this is all very convenient for me. I can do my UI in HTML, and I have all the power of .NET on the back end to do whatever processing I want. But making calls into C++ dynamic libraries is not always easy and straightforward. So we have this wrapper that takes care of that for us, and that's what we're going to look at today. The Photino window class is that wrapper around that native code that makes it easier for us as .NET developers to call into those dynamic libraries without having to get down into a low level and work with things like DLL import. So it hides all the plumbing that you don't necessarily care about as a .NET developer. It lets you interact with a dynamic library. We use the idea of a partial class to break this class up into 3 different files just to make it a little bit easier to manage. So the first file is Photino DLL imports, and this is where we do the low-level import of the library. So this is where we're going to, on Windows or Linux or Mac, load the dynamic library and tell it that we want to make calls into all the different methods that are available. So if we want to, for example, set the size of the window programmatically, we're going to make a call into the dynamic library. So these are essentially our entry points to calling that native code. Now going in the other direction, we're going to respond to events. So events are going to be raised in Photino native when something happens, say the window moves or it's resized, or they just want to send us a message. And that's covered in these delegate. So when the window position changes, for example, we have an event defined. In this case, the event handler is going to pass back a point. It's going to pass back the location that the window is moved to. If we want to handle this event, we can register a handler in .NET and we'll be passed this information so that we can respond to it and do something. Another example might be just sending a message. So if the native application wants to send a message to the .NET application from JavaScript, as we saw when I clicked that button earlier, we can handle this web message received event and it gets passed a string. So whatever that string is, in that case we just had a message. It can be any type of a string. So this is a very basic way of communicating between the 2 applications. We can register for that event and say, I want to handle this whenever that happens on the native side. I want you to run this .NET code. And so again, this is all fairly low level plumbing. If we want to register for that message received so that JavaScript can send us a message, we just have to say, oh, I want to respond to that. I want to get that message, and then I can do whatever I want with that message. So again, this is all just plumbing code. You can see in this fairly lengthy file, there are a lot of handy properties, such as which platform am I running on. Sometimes you want to make a distinction. And then there are a series of properties and methods that have to do with the window itself, like whether the window is centered or whether it shows the Chrome, or if you just want it to show only the browser control with nothing around it, or the title of the window, or the zoom of the web control. So let's take a look at the location property, for example. As a .NET developer, I may want to query that native window and ask it where it is on the screen, or I may want to tell it that I want to move it to a location on the screen. If I'm asking for the location on the screen, I'm going to interact with the dynamic library at a low level, and I'm going to ask it for the top and left coordinates. If I want to move the window on the screen, I'm going to interact with that dynamic library and tell it where I want it to move to. So a lot of Fotino.net is communicating back and forth and handling that plumbing for you between the native window and .NET so that you can query and control the native window and or the browser control. One of the things we talked about in the last video were all the parameters that you pass to initialize one of those native windows. Things like what's the title of the window, and what is the start URL that you want to navigate to when the window comes up, and what's the size and position of the window, and what are the callbacks that I want to hook up to so that when that window is initialized, all those things are set up. And that's done through this class, Photino native parameters. And you can see here that there's a lot of fairly low-level code in here that has to deal with interacting with a dynamic library. The upshot of all this is that as a .NET developer, all I need to do is reference the Photino.NET package, and all that plumbing is included for me. So all I need to do as a developer is create an instance of my Photino window, and I can use these fluent methods to set some of those initial properties and set up my handlers and tell it which page I want to load, and then go ahead and fire up the window. Now I've got a mechanism for communicating between the two windows so that I can have the two pieces of my application talk to one another. Now up till now I've just shown that I was outputting the message that was received from JavaScript. What if I want to do something a little bit different with that? Well, one of the things that I'm passed in the handler is the sender, and that's the Photino window. So I'm going to cast that as a Photino window. This is how I send a message back to the window. So now I'm calling from .NET into JavaScript. And if we look back in our index.html, there was some code in here that ran when the page loaded. And this set up a message handler. And it said, whenever I receive a message, a string message, this is what I want to do. And in this case, I'm just showing it in an alert box. So if I go ahead and run this application, I can see my .NET window and I can see my native window. And this time when I click on call.NET, it's going to send the message to the .NET application, which is going to turn around and send it right back again, and then the JavaScript is going to show it in an alert window. And you can see that I've got some logging turned on, so I'm responding to that event. Now I can use that simple string passing mechanism to do whatever I like in the code. So for example, if I want to, instead of just sending that message back, maybe that message is going to mean something. So I'm going to parse it and figure out what they want me to do. Maybe I want to say window.setHeight and change the height of the window when I get that message. So now when I click this button, I'm going to send the message from JavaScript to .NET, and .NET is going to control the window and change its height to 500. So that's the basic communication between these two different processes that are running on the machine. In the next video, we're going to look at some more samples and have a more in-depth look at some of the things you can do with Photino.NET Wrapper. And as part of that, we're going to look at some of the more advanced scenarios you can use for communication.